So, science of writing. Some of you probably in your schools have been hearing about, talking about, reading stuff about the science of writing or other sciences of. I just want to read about the science of science personally, but um, hearing about this in your schools, it's maybe been a conversation kind of alongside the science of reading piece of things. And so this session, 15 minutes, I'm gonna kind of share some of the stuff that we've been reading a lot and thinking about in terms of the important stuff to know about what's out there, and then some ways that this could help in your schools as you're trying to think about both integrating reading and writing and also getting ahead of any places that you feel like you're maybe not quite where you want to be with writing instruction. So, um, first, I'll just mention that if you're newer to this conversation, a couple of things to know. I think the science of writing conversation out in the world is a different and quieter conversation, which feels great than like the science of reading conversation. Um, I did a bunch of reading over the past 2 years in particular to feel like I was really up to speed on like the current state of research in writing instruction. And I would say my impression is it's a smaller but a more consistent research base. There's less sort of wild all over the place people saying very different things. There's a lot of consistency in what folks are saying. Um, and in general, not as many researchers out there doing a lot of work into what K-12 writing instruction looks like. And the other thing to know is that the research base that is out there really strongly supports workshop teaching, workshop approaches, components. It's certainly not the only way that people could teach effectively, but it's it's the kind of thing that when you look through the research, you're like, oh wow, I'm doing a lot of this stuff really well, and here's some places that I could do even better. Um, so what are some of those like big names to know or big ideas to know? One thing that you may have heard about is the writing rope. This obviously, echoes the reading rope, um, and the simple view of reading that sort of became like very big in the reading world. And so again, you see these strands that are woven together to create skilled writing. If you look down the strands, like critical thinking, syntax, text structure, writing craft, transcription, is all probably stuff that you teach. So one of the ways to look at this in your school is to say, like, of these strands, we're probably doing stuff with all these strands, but is there one that feels a little weaker, a little more frayed than the others that we'd like to devote some time to? For example, a lot of schools, when they felt like, oh, we're not doing not even enough with grammar, but we're not teaching grammar in a way that feels like it sticks or works, that syntax strand was one they maybe wanted to pay attention to. Probably if you're teaching writing workshop, if you look at that critical thinking, the way Joan Sedita defines critical thinking, it's basically the writing process. You're probably doing that pretty well, right? Pretty strongly. Um, Maybe you look down and you're like, oh, the writing craft, like we're teaching a lot, but that's the part that kids tend to feel is the weakest, or don't do as well with it. Um, so I think this is a useful way to think about your writing instruction, but also I think you'll find as you go through that you're like, oh yeah, we're doing a lot of this. We're really addressing these components. Um, and I think another thing to think about is just as Duke and Cartwright offered the revision of the reading rope to the active view of reading, which added sort of processes like strategy use, executive functioning, motivation. I think the same could be said here. Just as in reading, kids have to do the work to bring those strands together using sort of self-regulatory processes, right? They have to decide when to apply different strategies, and they also have to think about, like how they're managing it. Lori, that's a really cool coincidence. I love that. Well, she's famous, as you know, but famous right here in this workshop. So Joan Sedita is one name to know, and the writing rope is sort of one concept to think about, right? Um, Another like place to sort of get some big names and to get some big concepts all in one place is thinking about the What Works Clearinghouse. They have, these educator practice guides that are out there. I'm going to share a link in the chat to this as well as to another resource that I'll mention in a minute. In this practice guide, the summary is to the left, that these 4 things were the big 4 takeaways that they had when they sort of looked across the research. And I believe this was put out in 2019. Um, that daily time to write was supported by the research. Using the writing process was supported by all the research. Getting kids to be more fluent at transcription, which includes spelling, handwriting, keyboarding, like the physical act of putting their ideas to paper or keyboard, and creating an engaged community of writers. So they go into all the research and summary, which is very helpful, especially if you're trying to like sum this up for others, whether families or colleagues. But that's helpful to know that, again, you're seeing a lot of the same things that show up in the writing rope, right? Um, Using the writing process, transcription, the writing rope adds some more to it. Um, and then you have Steve Graham, who I also linked one of his articles, his most recent, probably not his most recent, but very relevant to this topic, recent article, The Sciences of Reading and Writing Must Become More Fully Integrated. Steve Graham is probably one of the biggest names in K-12 writing research and has a lot of really great stuff out there if you ever need to think about, explaining the research behind your approaches to families or anybody. Steve Graham is a good name to know. And I'm just going to put up a slide in a minute of one of the things in his article that he does that has been helpful for me is just kind of laying out a summary of the major findings in writing research around effective practices. So we don't need to go into all of these in detail, but just if you scan through this list, these are things that he, through various meta-analyses, has said, like, okay, there's some consistent research finding that all of these things improve students' writing. They all produce statistically significant positive effects. And if you look through these, a lot of things are items that you probably yourself have seen positive effects in your students when they've, used mentor text, when they've taken meaningful feedback, when they've learned strategies that work for them. The last two items about spending more time getting practice writing, there's actually been a lot of studies that connect this, that he writes about as well, that writing more, like volume in a whole range of genres. So whether that's daily writing in a journal, writing across content areas, writing about reading, writing within writing workshop, produce positive effects on reading comprehension. Steve Graham argues that, like, we don't fully understand the mechanism there. Like, what is it exactly about more writing that leads to more reading comprehension? Is it a reciprocal effect? Like, that there's more study that needs to be done, but it is a pretty robust finding that if kids are spending more time writing, it is going to impact their reading, right? It's not the solution, but it's a piece of the puzzle. And this all is the basis of him arguing that both we need to really pay closer attention to writing instruction in this country, and probably worldwide, that there's a lot of focus on reading instruction, appropriately so, but that we also need to pay attention to how writing instruction is going, and that we need to have time for writing instruction, which is sometimes the bigger barrier, is that gets squeezed out, particularly if you're adopting a new reading program that sort of tries to do everything and maybe fills up a lot of your literacy block. Writing can very easily get squeezed out. So if we're thinking then about how do you take all this sort of research that feels generally pretty like, okay, this is feeling good, this is feeling like I'm research backed here, how do you use this in your school, your classroom? How can this help you on a practical level? So 3 things that could be helpful. One is that you and your team, your school, your community could look at a list like this one, or like the one from the What Works Clearinghouse, like any sort of list. You could just look at the writing rope, right? And choose a goal to work on. So it could be that, again, you're thinking, okay, in general, my school's doing a pretty good job of um, of following sort of research-based practices in elementary writing, but nonetheless, there's this one piece we're missing, or nonetheless, there's this one piece we could strengthen. And this could be just a way to structure some goal setting or planning for a school, a team, a grade level, even an individual teacher if you wanted to, right? So I think that can be a powerful move. So second thing you might do is, again, making time for writing and protect that time. That can be harder if you're just one teacher pushing against the tide. But as a school, this is one of the most powerful things you can do, is to make sure that no matter what other pressures there are, writing has time. And aside from the fact that, like, there's research suggesting that it helps reading, there's specifically in K2, there's been a lot of research suggesting that when we're thinking about phonics and phonemic awareness, writing is one of the most powerful ways to strengthen that. Linnea Airy, who's a big name in sort of early literacy, talks a lot about how writing supports kids in letter sound correspondence, but also in orthographically mapping. As a parent of a K2 student myself, I feel very strongly from watching my daughter's work that really the thing that made sort of phonics click in her head was writing. She had almost no interest in learning it as a reader, which was a little bit of a dagger to my heart personally, but she loved writing workshop. And when it was writing workshop time, she practiced all those skills that she was being taught that she had zero interest in practicing and reading. And that's what really made it click as a reader as well. Just for fun, I put up this, she wrote second half of kindergarten, the beginning of a 2-page note begging her friend Alyssa, I want to have a play date, so please beg your mom and listen because I really want to have a play date. The listening was the key part. That is why Alyssa and her did not have a play date. There was no listening. But as I would watch this and thinking about what I know as a teacher also about what I could learn from this about her understanding of phonics, letter sound correspondence, watching her grow from the beginning of kindergarten to later and be like, oh, she's getting the vowels in there now. Um, she just doesn't know how to make all the vowel sounds like play. She's got the A, but she doesn't know that, you could do a Y there. She's got your Y-O-R. Watching this, I'm like, oh, she's getting, she's getting the phonemic awareness. I'm seeing it develop. She just doesn't know all the spellings yet. And I think that, like, we all see that with kids, right? Sometimes the writing is the thing that helps it click, but for all kids, writing is a thing that helps it develop and solidify and practice, right? Yes, she has a very persuasive voice. That is why she likes writing so much. She likes to tell us what to do. And then I think we can also just try to slip back to, there we go. Bringing reading and writing closer together. So a lot of times it feels like that has to mean that all your units have to perfectly dovetail and everything has to be very like matchy all the time. And it doesn't. It might mean that you're thinking as a grade level team about bringing more writing into content area studies so that they're writing about what they're learning, whether that's through reading or experience or a read aloud or videos or whatever in social studies or science. Maybe it means trying to just create those deliberate connections between reading and writing units and phonics teaching, phonics units, just a little bit more deliberately. Maybe it's trying to link skills like phonics skills, knowledge generation, whatever, and saying, in reading, we learned this, and now we're going to use it as a writer, like reading as a writer, writing as a reader, even at the youngest grades. So it doesn't have to be that all your units are perfectly aligned or all your units are interdisciplinary all the time in every way. But I do think it could not hurt to think about, are there ways to bring everything a little closer together, a little bit more aligned?